And now I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and I'm going to start sharing the PowerPoints.
All right, fantastic. I have to say I'm so impressed that there's such a large group. Some names I recognize, but many, many names I do not. And so I really am grateful for you to spend this very cold evening with me hearing about homelessness. And with this kind of weather, I have to say it's quite appropriate for us to be inside thinking about the people who are outside and what can we do as a community to do better by them. So I'm going to talk a lot about today homelessness, specifically in the Fairfax Falls Church community. Many of these facts and these points apply to every community across the United States. We as an entire nation are facing this challenge on homelessness, and we've made progress, but we have a long, long way to go. And so I look forward to hearing your questions. I'm looking forward to providing whatever information is helpful for all of you. But I think this slide deck shares a lot of vital details that you may not be aware of how much is already occurring here in the Fairfax Falls Church community. So next slide. So to give you an overview of this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the community partnership, or what we call our continuum of care. I'm going to talk about the trends in homelessness in our community, some of the challenges and the ways that we've responded and succeeded in meeting those challenges, an overview of the services and many of our providers here in the Fairfax Falls Church community, and then make sure at the very end I get all of your questions at the end. And as Suzette was saying, if there's things that I can't answer tonight, I know many, many people in the county and within our nonprofit community that can hopefully we can get you your questions answered as soon as possible after the meeting. Next slide. So when we talk about our community partnership or the continuum of care, it is across many different sectors, and they each have a very specific role to play. Government obviously plays an important role. It is the public provider of homeless services, but also health services, mental health services, neighborhood and community services, so many things that are the foundation upon which many of the health and human services and housing is built upon. But we can't do it without this broader partnership. Whether I'm talking about homelessness or really anything related to our community, it takes partnership, collaboration. And our Office to Prevent and End Homelessness was established based on this recognition that government alone cannot solve homelessness. We need to be a convener, facilitator, a dedicated faith.
When is on?
I think, Mr. Kearney, your microphone's on. So we are the faithful eternal partners in this work, but we can't do it without you. And so I mentioned government, nonprofits, really they provide the bulk of homeless services in our community, whether through contracts with the county or with donations provided by you and other community members. And oftentimes hand in hand, arm in arm with the faith community, you here tonight. Many of you have probably served as part of the hypothermia prevention program. I'll talk a bit more about that in a couple slides, but faith community too is an essential partner. But it's not just the service providers, it's businesses as well. Businesses have a role to play in terms of speaking to what are theirs and their employees and their workforce's needs. When we talk about affordable housing and the need for affordable housing, it is important both from a family, individual well-being perspective, but also from an economic development perspective. Many new businesses that are considering moving to Fairfax County are concerned about where will their employees live, and they'd much rather them live closer to work than have to commute an hour or more to work. So they also can provide a really amazing amount of resources, as they do, often through donations and volunteer efforts with the local nonprofit organizations. Individuals also, they are donors and volunteers, and they serve the community in many different ways. And again, I'm going to talk in a few minutes about more ways that you as an individual and as a faith community can serve and be a partner. Next slide. So as a faith community, you are essential partners. Not only do you provide services like the hypothermia prevention program for now, it's 19 years, you also provide a lot of emergency and rental assistance, and utility assistance in partnership with what we call our coordinated services planning. This has been going on for many years, where you provide financial resources to help keep people in their homes and prevent people from ever becoming homeless in the first place, which makes good sense in terms of our values as humans, but also just good economic sense, keeping people from becoming homeless in the first place. More and more faith community partners are becoming housing providers, or at least partners in developing new affordable housing. First Christian Church and the Lamb Center's projects with Wesley Housing are two notable projects. The Lamb Center, for example, is developing over 50 studio apartments for people who are formerly homeless. And these are going to be supportive housing, where it's not just affordable housing, but you've got services there on site to help keep people housed. And this is going to be transformative in the lives of many people who have been chronically homeless and unsheltered on the streets for years. And so these are really significant. For a long time, we've been asking the faith community, how can we work together? As many faith communities own substantial parcels of land that are suitable for development of affordable housing. And so there's many opportunities there. It's not a short road, but it's a road that ultimately leads to incredible benefits, both for the faith community partners, the developers, and the residents of Fairfax County. But I think most significantly, what the faith community does that really no other part of this partnership does is really provides moral leadership. I can tell you it's both in the 80s and in the early 2000s when the faith community led the way in saying we must do more to serve people experiencing homelessness. First in the 80s, before we had any real shelters in Fairfax County, you opened your doors to your houses of worship and said, we cannot let families with children or single adults be sleeping on the streets, especially during the colder weather. And so you responded in the most humanitarian, caring way possible and said, eventually, we as a faith community cannot do it alone. County government must step up to provide homeless services. And it did. Because of that moral leadership, Fairfax County opened some of its first shelters, such as the Eleanor Kennedy Shelter, Monlock House, Amber Rucker Shelter, Bailey's Community Shelter, many of these shelters that have been really essential sort of building blocks to our homeless services system for 40 years. And so we thank you for that. So you're often the first to provide a service and then holding county government and supporting local nonprofits. And you also have members on our homeless services governing board. For example, Reverend Wilds at Rising Hope in South County is a member, and again is bringing that same type of moral leadership to the conversation along with other sectors from government and nonprofit partners. Next slide. So I mentioned the hypothermia prevention program. This is a sort of a screenshot of a flyer that we've been distributing and is available on our website about the hypothermia prevention program. And it runs during 4 winter months from December 1st to March 31st. In November, we start to gradually open it as the temperatures get colder, but we are completely open December 1st. And this is the best example of a public-private partnership that we have around responding to homelessness in our community. Again, in the early 2000s, the faith community said that we are seeing people die on the streets unnecessarily in Fairfax County, one of the wealthiest communities in this country, because they don't have shelter to go to. And so again, houses of worship were open, people were able to sleep on their floors, but they said again, the government must step up. And so Fairfax County government responded by providing additional financial support and contracting with local nonprofits like New Hope Housing, Facets, and Cornerstones to open up sites throughout the entire winter. And it's an incredibly challenging program to run, but also extremely rewarding. For any of you whose church or mosque or synagogue or other house of worship may have opened your doors during winter months, usually for a week or two, you'll see the people who are sleeping on the streets most of the year in Fairfax County. And you may see the same folks come back again and again, and them struggling with chronic homelessness. People who are chronically homeless tend to be struggling with substance use disorders, behavioral health issues, but oftentimes one of the things that they need the most is to be connected to a community. And the community that they find through your various houses of worship is really so enriching. To have people giving their time, making food, spending time with them, talking to them, lending an ear. It is really an important life-saving program for Fairfax County. I do hope that someday we will stop providing the service. The vision of our department and office is that really everybody has a home that they can afford, regardless of their background, their income, that there's a home for everyone in that vast continuum of housing types. So you see some contact information here. Again, you can just search Fairfax County Hypothermia Program and you'll get it on Google, and you can download a flyer both in English and Spanish. Provides a lot of helpful, again, life-saving information on where to go on any given winter night, so that really any adult in Fairfax County who's in need of shelter can get it, no questions asked. Next slide, please. So we often look in the news locally and across the nation, and we think, wow, we're really falling behind when it comes to homelessness. And it's true in recent years, as you'll see in a minute, we have lost some ground when it comes to homelessness. But at the same time, looking over the past 10 years, our community partnership has had some really significant achievements in reducing homelessness and increasing housing for people experiencing homelessness. You see here reductions, 22% fewer people experiencing homelessness, less chronic homelessness, fewer families with children, 68% fewer unsheltered individuals. I mean, that is a testament to the housing that's being created because we are more competitive for federal and state funding, that we are wisely investing local government funding, and we're creating things like 70% more permanent supportive housing. Now, again, these reductions do not mean an end to homelessness as we know it, but it's showing that we know the keys that are going to open this door. We know the tactics that work, specifically around veterans. Veterans are a group nationally that you've seen some of the biggest reductions because as a nation, we have invested in homelessness solutions that work. That's been shown to work through research based on what's called a housing first approach, where the approach starts with housing and then services follow to keep people housed. Yes, do we have a question?
Yep, Barbara has a question. Barbara, don't forget to unmute.
Yes, thank
Fantastic.
you. Thank you. And thank you very much and good evening. Tom, can you just say where you're getting these sources of statistics where the numbers are going down? Because as I drive through Fairfax County, I see a lot of homeless people in places and neighborhoods where I've not seen them before. So from my eyes, it looks like homelessness has increased as opposed to decreasing. Yeah, so that tends to be my experience as I'm driving through various components of Fairfax County, and I'm always amazed to see people in different places. So
yeah, Barbara, thank you for raising that question. I really should have mentioned that myself. The perception around homelessness becoming a bigger deal in Fairfax County and across the DC region is based on, from what I can tell, primarily a factor of it being more visible. So most people experiencing homelessness are in a shelter. And so many times they are the invisible homeless. Who the most visible homeless are those who are unsheltered, who are not in a shelter, who may be sleeping in a bus stop, in a tent, in the woods, or in their cars. And this is where it's become a lot more visible. I can tell you, since I've been working in Fairfax County around homelessness since 2005, the number of calls that we're getting in our office has drastically increased because number of people that are visibly homeless has increased, or at least they become more visible. And what I mean by that is, you take the Reston Tyson's area, for example. When the Silver Line was constructed, there were many, many acres of woods that were torn down. Many of those wooded areas, people were sleeping in with their tents. And so suddenly they are no longer in the tents in the woods. They are sleeping at a bus stop, sometimes literally on the sidewalk. They are panhandling. And the same thing goes for other parts of the county. The county is really quickly changing from what used to be a rural suburban community to a suburban urban community, and there's less and less wooded areas for people to hide in. So that's kind of the best way that I can explain it. The numbers that are here are based on our annual point in time count. It is far from a perfect measure, as we'll talk about in a second. It is just a one-night snapshot. But we've been very consistent about the methodology over the years, and we send outreach staff to all of our local hotspots on those nights of the counts. And so I think while the numbers overall, people homeless down, that those who may be visible on the streets has certainly increased.
Okay, thank you. And in your presentation, thank you for that. And also in your presentation, are you going to talk about the working poor that are also homeless? You know, those that have jobs but still cannot afford a home?
Absolutely. I
Thank
mean,
you.
I think that's a great question. I think when we talk about preventing and ending homelessness, it's not just about those who are literally homeless on any given night. We need to do whatever possible to prevent homelessness from ever occurring in the first place. We want to make it as rare as possible. And so the county has invested tens of millions of dollars in local funds as well as federal pandemic funds and state funds to prevent evictions, especially over the past few years. But it's been a challenge. So if actually you can go to the next slide, I'll talk a bit about that.
Yep, but we have
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. We have a hand up from Heidi as well. Heidi?
Okay.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks very much for the information. You referenced the data around the veterans. Do you have contact information if we are talking with a veteran who potentially could leverage those services? Do you have contact for those in the Fairfax County area?
Yeah, I mean, the most direct way is my contact information, which I believe is on the last slide of this deck.
Oh, okay.
You know, that is one way that we can get connected. There is also
Tom,
yeah.
is that so you are helping to facilitate veterans who are homeless to try and locate, and you are affiliated with the VA or Fairfax County?
So I'm a Fairfax County government employee, but our office facilitates a monthly work group trying to identify everyone who's a veteran experiencing homelessness and connecting them to services, whether it be the VA or many of the other services locally.
Got it. And are you going to also provide the total numbers rather than just the percentages that you provided on the earlier slide?
I'd be
happy if you have some.
Yeah, if you like, I can give you some more specific details, either here in the slides, or if you have more detailed questions afterwards, you can email me at that address that's on the last slide.
Yeah, or as you indicate, 22% decrease, for example. I'm just curious how that is compared to the total number of citizens that live in Fairfax County. Obviously, that's gonna. So is homelessness gone down, or are we seeing more people, to Barbara's point, because there's actually more population? So it's just sort of curious to look what those total numbers are as opposed to the percentages.
Yeah, I'd be happy to get you some more specifics. I think one of the great resources that we have in the DC region is an annual point in time report that we publish with all 9 cities and counties across the DC8 region. And it does include in that report a per capita rate that I think may get to some of the questions you have. Fairfax County's population, from what I understand, just decreased for the first time in many, many years last year.
Oh, okay.
Which was a sudden turn after many years of increases. But again, I don't have all those details with me tonight, but I'm happy to get some
Thank
more
you.
later on. So what you see here is sort of a trend lines around the number of people experiencing homelessness in the Fairfax Falls Church community, according to the point in time. The highest number was back in 2008 when we first adopted our latest strategies to prevent and end homelessness. And it really declined all the way to 2017. And by that point, we had reduced homelessness by 46% as measured by the point in time count. But as you'll see then, after 2017, we hit a plateau. And then when the pandemic hit, we saw a pretty sharp spike upwards. And it's become just a general trend line upwards since the pandemic. We generally talk about people who are literally homeless as being in either emergency shelter, transitional housing, or unsheltered. But as Barbara was mentioning before, homelessness is also much broader than just people who are literally homeless on the streets or in shelters. There are many people who may be doubled up with families or friends because of economic reasons. They may be sleeping in hotels, even if they're paying on their own. Now, while these folks are not counted in the point in time methodology that's defined by the US Department of Housing, they are, in a broader sense, experiencing housing instability and homelessness and are really part of the same challenge. So please don't take the literally homeless numbers as the only measure that matters. There are literally tens of thousands of people in Fairfax County who are at risk of homelessness because of poverty, disabilities, and other risk factors. So this is the tip of the iceberg of a much bigger iceberg in terms of housing instability. And the needs for affordable housing are great. Next slide. I saw a question in the slide about demographics, and I think we're going to get to that in
Okay,
just a
so
second.
you get to that question.
Yeah, let me pull up that.
Let me advance the slide.
Yeah, I think this will answer that question exactly. So these are, again, available on our website. If you Google Fairfax County point in time, it'll take you to a web page where it has this dashboard you can dive into and analyze it based on year and many different demographics. This is for the latest point in time count that was done in January 2023. And you may ask, well, what about 2024? Well, in about, I think it's 8 days from now, we'll be conducting our 2024 point in time count with communities all across the country. This is something that every community is doing around the same time. All of Virginia and DC are doing it on January 24th in the evening. So I wanted to highlight a few things about these demographics. And much of it depends on whether you're looking at one of these 2 big segments of the population. Generally, the population of people experiencing homelessness can be divided among people who are families with children, at least one adult and one child, or they may be single adults or adult households, and maybe a couple. And those populations differ significantly in many different ways. But overall, this is what the demographics look like. And I think one thing I wanted to point out right off the bat is that 35% of the people experiencing homelessness on the night of the point in time count were under the age of 18, they're children, right? And so when you think about the vulnerability, the long-term effects that it has on their lives, I think this adds a degree of urgency and a bit of a wake-up call saying that these are people who, by no fault of their own, are experiencing one of the worst things that you can experience, not having a home. The educational effects, the health effects, economic effects, they can be long-standing. And so really, again, preventing homelessness whenever possible is really important. I want to also look at the race on the far side. I think it's shocking to people when they realize that among Black or African American individuals, they are 50% of the population experiencing homelessness on a given night. Whereas in Fairfax County, in the general population, Black or African Americans are only about 10% of the population. So 50% versus 10%. That reality speaks to both the legacy and the current realities of racism, discrimination, with regards to housing, employment, healthcare, the justice system. All of these things show up within our homeless services numbers. Oftentimes we talk about homeless services as providers, as sort of the safety net that when people fall through the cracks of other safety nets. So whether it be child welfare, justice system, et cetera, we're often seeing folks who have been failed by multiple systems. So I saw the comment that it's not surprising. I'm glad, obviously people are becoming more and more aware of this, but whether it goes back to redlining in terms of cutting people who are Black or African American off from wealth building opportunities through owning a home, or even today, it's routine that studies come out and charges come out where housing providers and employers are regularly discriminating against people who are Black. So that shows up.
Tom, we have a hand up from Richard.
Yeah, yes, Tom, thanks a lot for your presentation. On your demographics, your female male breakdown, what I have tried to understand is, that being the case, why is there such a disparate number of male beds and female beds in shelters then? Because obviously that's almost like a 2 or 3 to 1 ratio.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if this was a live dashboard, I could move it around to show you the differences between the single adult population and the families with children. Among single adults who our adult shelters serve at Bailey's and Everett Rucker and Kennedy, it is essentially 2 to 1 male to female. That is the population that we're seeing. It's skewing more female than it was 20 years ago. It used to be 3 to 1 male to female. But we still have a disproportionate number of men in our adult shelters compared to the family shelters, which are really an entirely much more youth-driven population.
Is there any intent to rebalance the numbers of beds? We've dealt with 3 cases recently, women, which we've had to put in motels because the shelters being full, the only option is to sleep on the floor or go to hypothermia every night. Yeah,
in our newest shelters that we're designing, we are using the current demographic breakdowns to set aside beds and build rooms to accommodate women at a higher rate.
Thank you.
Yeah, the one last thing I'd mention here, well, maybe 2 last things. We do include numbers of people in various subpopulations, both those chronically homeless, veterans. You see, we only had 34 veterans identified on the night of the last point in time count. That is down over the years, and because of significant investments and resources. We have people who are fleeing domestic violence, and a much larger number of people with a history of domestic violence. Transitionally aged youth, these are youth between 18 and 24, people with limited English proficiency, formerly in foster care, formerly institutionalized. These are sort of the populations that show up in greater percentages than in the general population. You see people with certain disabilities, obviously serious mental illness. It is not the cause of homelessness, but it is one of those things that really makes people particularly vulnerable to homelessness. A lot of modern research has started to show that really homelessness is a housing problem. There are many other factors that aggravate or make it more likely for someone, an individual, to become homeless. But if you look at populations across the United States, their housing markets are the best predictors as to whether homelessness will increase, whether they will have a large homeless population. And specifically, what is the median rent compared to the median income? And what is the vacancy rate? These things are actually quite effective at predicting what is the likelihood. But as the saying goes, on an individual level, it's sort of a awful game of musical chairs. There's not enough chairs for everyone that needs them, and the people who are often left without a chair or without a home are those with disabilities, those who have been discriminated against. And so we have people literally sleeping on the streets. The last thing I'll mention is regarding employment and income. I think it is often surprising how many people have income, over half of income. And among families with children, the number that are employed is over half. As a population as a whole, I think it's just over 30%, if I can see that number correctly. So work alone or income alone does not prevent someone from becoming homeless, obviously, when the rents in our community are so high. Next slide, please. So when I talked about our successes, that was based on the key strategies that we developed back in 2008 or adopted in 2008 as a community, which are pretty common sense, but in some ways were a departure from what we had always done. As I mentioned right up front, prevention. We need to keep people from becoming homeless in the first place. This is both good economic sense. It's more expensive to shelter and to have to rehouse somebody than to keep them in their housing. So paying some emergency rental assistance goes a long way and keep people from ever becoming homeless in the first place. Much of this work is done through the faith community and through coordinated services planning, but many of our homeless service partners participate in this work as well. Preservation. As I mentioned, homelessness is a housing problem. We need to not only preserve the affordable housing that we have, but we also need to increase the number of affordable housing units. The current Board of Supervisors has adopted an ambitious plan to create 10,000 new units of affordable housing by 2034. We are well on our way. They had increased it from 5,000 just a couple years back. The reality is that we need tens of thousands, even more beyond that. But this is work that, again, that can't just happen with local government alone. It's going to take businesses, faith communities. It's going to take other government partners across the region all pitching in towards the same goal. And it's going to require significant, difficult decisions around things like zoning and land use, as you've seen in communities like Arlington and Alexandria recently wrestling with these issues. Next, integration. Part of the challenge in a large human services system with different sectors like nonprofit and government is that they can often operate in silos. We can have organizations that are community-based, working in a specific neighborhood that may not be aware of or integrated into what's happening countywide, and vice versa. The county government may not understand what are the needs on the front lines in a neighborhood. And how, we need to figure out how to get resources better allocated to communities that need them most. And we need better ways of communicating. I can tell you, if any of you are working like I am every day, it's pretty much staring at a computer and your email all day long. Of course, there's Zoom calls, Microsoft Teams, etc. These things are helpful in increasing communication, but doesn't necessarily create a better, more integrated system. We're going to need to figure out new and innovative ways of delivering services. And finally, I think what was most substantially new in 2008 when this was adopted was implementation. Basically, we needed to hold ourselves accountable. And so what that meant at the time was creating a governing board for the partnership to prevent and end homelessness. And essentially we were expected as staff, as providers, to come back routinely and report to this board, be challenged by the board, and be led by this board into the future with new strategies. We have just recently rechartered our board, which consists of partners from across many different sectors, and we're excited to begin this year a new strategic planning process, starting with a community engagement process where we will be speaking to people experiencing homelessness, asking people from the broader community, what are the causes of homelessness, what's the best ways to solve it, and what are the top priorities if the county were to invest new resources the board, when I first presented to them or last presented to them, they expected me to come back within the next year and with a set of budget recommendations for a future fiscal year and say, please, what is it that our community needs to do to take our efforts to prevent and end homelessness to another level. So I'm looking forward to both the community engagement process and coming back with new strategies and new recommendations. It's going to be complex and not an easy process, but it's terribly important to build some consensus among our community about what is the best way forward. And so that will be important. Next.
Tom, I have a question from the chat. How have the immigrants who are not here legally and that were bused to the DMV affected Fairfax County homelessness?
Yeah, that's a good question. So communities all across the country have seen people migrating from the southern border primarily from many different national backgrounds. You open the news and you can see that. Some communities have been affected in bigger ways than others, most specifically urban communities like DC and New York. DC and New York, especially because they actually have legal rights to shelter, where anybody who comes and requests shelter will receive it. And so that puts a huge demand financially on these cities, but other cities are seeing it too. Denver and I think even state of Massachusetts and other communities, we're all feeling it. And even in Fairfax County, we've seen folks who have migrated out from DC to other communities looking for places to settle, looking for resources, looking for family and friends. And so it's certainly been one of the many challenges that we are facing. But I would say because people who are not documented immigrants, they have little options to work. They also are typically not eligible for most long-term housing programs. They're often left on their own, trying to really rely on their community supports. Oftentimes, people from the same immigrant community that they are from, and oftentimes sharing housing. Sadly, sometimes an overcrowded housing, which can also be very dangerous. So, I mean, these are some of the ways that it's affected us, but surely not to the same extent that you're seeing in many urban areas. Now, these numbers are about a year or so out of date, but I want to give you a sense of really the tremendous investment that Fairfax County has in terms of government dollars in homeless services. And this is all together in one fiscal year. Total government, you see three slices. First with the states, 1.6 million, then the federal government's almost 10 million, and then for local government, 20 million. Altogether, almost $32 million in a single year, and that did not include non-pandemic funding. That served over 6,000 people experiencing homelessness and were recently housed, including 721 families with children. These support not just the emergency shelters that you all know, but things like the homeless healthcare program, our street outreach workers, our domestic violence shelters, and permanent supportive housing, which is a research-tested, proven way to end homelessness. Now, these numbers have gone up in FY23 as inflation has hit our service provider community. Contracts have been increased to help them not only attract and retain staff who they're competing with other commercial sectors like retail and food service for employees, but also to pay for things like rent. That has obviously gone up. So I think this is not the same in most communities across this country. I'll tell you, I hear from people all up and down the East Coast, oftentimes people who are homeless, saying, where can we go to get assistance? Typically, they can't get Fairfax County assistance because they're not a resident or working here. But they are saying in their community, they have nowhere to go. Other communities are not investing at the same rate. Now, we do have the largest homeless population in all of Virginia. So, we need to invest to meet that challenge. But this kind of investment is not typical, I would say. And so we really do have some pride in Fairfax County and the leadership trying to meet this need. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, challenges do remain both here in the county as well as the nation. Most recently, the numbers were released in, I think, December that showed increases all across the country. I believe it was 12% nationally went up. And what we're feeling is really the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and many of the challenges associated with the pandemic. Obviously, many people experience health crises, both physical as well as behavioral or mental. The opioid crisis is running in parallel with this. People are depressed and isolated at higher rates than ever. Many people lost jobs, and while some people returned to jobs and those better paying jobs, many people did not. They may have come out of the job market, or they may have taken new jobs that just simply don't provide the hours or the pay that they need. As a result, we've seen an increase of evictions. We had some of the lowest eviction rates ever during the pandemic because we had tens of millions of dollars of federal emergency rental assistance, but also by law, federally and at one point in the state, there was a moratorium on evictions. It just could not be done. Now, this made it very difficult for many people who owned properties and had to pay their mortgages. But we saw some of the lowest evictions ever. But as soon as those moratoriums ended and the emergency rental assistance became less and tapered down, we started to see significant increases in evictions. It really began in late 2022, became very high, and it started to taper down, but not enough through 2023. It's still quite high. And at one point, it was above what it was in 2019. I'll tell you one website that shows great statistics for our region is the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance, NVAHA. Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance has a great website with eviction related data if you're interested in diving deeper there. When it comes down to homelessness, it's often about income not matching the cost of living, and rent being one of the most important things, but obviously food, childcare, transportation. While inflation is leveling off, it still went up significantly over the past year or so, and it has not come down. Once those costs went up, they did not come down, and pay does not always keep pace with that, especially in the lowest paying jobs. So we've seen the increased demand in shelter and other human services, while at the same time, we've seen in my 25 years, the biggest challenge in attracting staff to work in human services, including homelessness. Many of our nonprofit providers simply cannot keep staff working in the shelters. Not only is it in person, you can't work it remote. It's often the pay is not great, and you're working 24/7 hours. You're working in very high stress, draining. Sometimes the people get burnt out easily in these jobs. They're not easy ones. And so turnover is high. Even though it was always high, it's higher than it's ever been. And so you'll hear sometimes from people who have experienced homelessness over a year say they've had 4 or 5 different case managers, and that's clearly not a way to deliver effective homeless services. And so we need to do better. And as I mentioned, some of the contract increases have helped get there. The county government has also had similar challenges, and we've been using things like bonuses and increased pay to attract people into some of the most difficult jobs, including the police or the community services boards, mental health workers, all of which are really essential for a safe and thriving community. Didn't mention housing, but obviously when housing is in short supply, it's going to be unaffordable. The racial disparities, we need to do better in establishing more equitable outcomes. And climate change, I mean, we all know it is looming, but in many ways it's already here. Just this past summer, we saw the warmest temperatures globally, and I forgot how many years, but many, many years. And so in Fairfax County, we're having to do more to respond to extreme heat, much like we've always done around extreme cold. We need to keep people safer during the summertime. And that means providing more supplies to keep people cool, fans and water, daytime places for people to go to drop in and be welcomed. We trained staff across many different county facilities to welcome in people who are experiencing homelessness or those who just need a place to cool off. But also, unexpectedly, we had to respond to wildfire smoke. If you remember those few bad days, you couldn't go outside without feeling like you were choking. And so we had to provide masks and, again, indoor places with treated air so people could stay safe. All these things combined have resulted in really a more threatening, dangerous place with more people experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. So we have a lot to do. I mentioned our community engagement work, but I also wanted to say that we are in the process of renovating or replacing several of our emergency shelters. The Bailey's Shelter and Supportive Housing was completed in 2019. The Eleanor Kennedy Shelter and Brucker Shelter and Patrick Henry Family Shelter are all underway, and this is thanks to the voters of Fairfax County who approved a bond referendum to fund these important projects. Many of our shelters, like I said, are coming close to 40 years old and do not meet the needs of our current homeless services system and the people experiencing homelessness. And so we need to do better, whether it's the percentage of female to male beds. We need to get rid of bunk beds. You know, as the general population is aging, so is the homeless population. I, for one, don't want to be climbing into a bunk bed, but I can tell you that when we have 60, 70, 80, and even 90-year-olds in our shelters, bunk beds just simply aren't acceptable. And the pandemic taught us that really social distancing saves lives in terms of infectious diseases like COVID. And so we need to create more spacious places that are both safe, but also more welcoming, so that people who may be choosing to sleep outside may see shelter as a better alternative. We need to increase permanent supportive housing. We currently have more units of permanent supportive housing in our pipeline than we've ever had as a community. And that's close to 100 units coming online in the next couple of years. Through our local funding and our own local development efforts. We are currently in the process of soliciting new homeless services contracts. So many of the big organizations that you know that provide homeless services are now having to recompete for these contracts, which are close to $20 million in value. And so this is a very challenging time for our nonprofit partners for all the reasons I already mentioned, but they also are beginning a process of competing for these same projects. And we typically see some competition period after period through this process as we release a request for proposals. They're due in February, and then the county staff, myself included, will be involved in the process of selecting vendors for these services. I mentioned eviction prevention already. While we had far more funding from the federal government during the worst of the pandemic, the County Board of Supervisors saw that the need to prevent evictions has continued and has provided local funding to help bridge us through this period and help step down the level of assistance to a level that will be higher than what it was pre-pandemic, but not as high as what it was during the worst of the pandemic. So I help co-facilitate an eviction prevention work group every month where we're always sharing data on how many evictions there are, how can we do better, and reaching out to tenants and landlords to make sure they're aware of what assistance is provided and to stop evictions before they get to court, or if they're in court, to resolve them in a way that everyone's satisfied. Panhandling, which I know is something that, just talking to my own friends and family, is something that everyone is aware of in Fairfax County in terms of the number of people who are panhandling across this county and across the entire DC region as well. The Board of Supervisors are thinking through how is the best way to respond to this challenge in a way that's caring and not rooted in criminalizing the issue. And so we are actively looking for contractors or vendors who have experience in providing good quality data with an engaging marginalized population, such as those who are panhandling, to better understand their needs and how can the county respond in a positive way to help meet their their needs and help them, not have to stand outside all day. We've tried new projects such as hiring people experiencing homelessness to help clean the streams in Fairfax County with the Department of Public Works and many of our nonprofit partners. We're literally putting people to work straight from the shelter, and in some cases they're getting long-term jobs in the county, and we're quite proud of that, because while this temporary employment provides great opportunities, it's not going to help keep people housed in long term. So we know they need jobs, long full-time jobs. I mentioned the extreme heat response. We're going to need to continue to improve that. We did our first year of testing out some new things this past year in 2023, and we've already realized in 2024 some of the ways we need to improve, such as getting the word out on how to stay safe from the heat. Outside of when do we activate overflow shelter capacity and what kind of supplies do we have, we need to educate folks on how do you stay safe from the heat and know where the nearest cooling center is and how do you get there. There's a lot of things we can do. And for people who are housed but maybe don't have an air conditioning, they haven't been able to pay the utilities, we need to keep them safe as well and make sure they're aware of the ways to stay cool, including the county cooling centers. Next slide, please. Now, this is a very basic sort of graph about what are homeless services and the different project types. So we've got 4 big categories by color. We have prevention. That includes both eviction prevention and homelessness prevention. They're not one and the same. In fact, most people who get evicted do not become literally homeless. They may not be on the streets, but they experience housing instability, and that can be extremely disruptive to their lives and the lives of their family. So both are important, but there's some differences. Street outreach. This is literally what it is. Staff who are paid to go out and try to find people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness and trying to engage them and make sure they're aware of shelter and help them get physical and mental health care as well as housing. If you ever see someone who's unsheltered, you don't think they've been seen by other folks or getting help, you can always call our office, let us know where did you see them, when did you see them, and we can dispatch one of our outreach teams. We're not a 24/7 dispatch, but we'll do it and get people to where they get people help as soon as possible. Then there's temporary types of projects or assistance. Emergency shelter and transitional housing are key steps out of homelessness, but they're not solutions in and of themselves. Anyone who's in shelter is considered homeless. It's a temporary place, and we got more people behind them that are going to need that shelter. And so we really need to create a shelter system that is housing focused and has ways to help people find and pay for rent, and stay in their new housing. Staying in the new housing is possible through permanent housing, whether that's rapid rehousing, where we literally help people find and pay through rental assistance for their housing, or permanent supportive, where it's deeply affordable long-term housing provided with supportive services. Permanent supportive housing is often targeted to people who are chronically homeless. That's roughly, let's say, 25% of the population. And the rest of the folks experiencing homelessness typically get more short to medium term assistance through rapid rehousing. Now, let me just go to the next slide and give you a sense of kind of how complicated it really is, and why many of our case managers, it takes a year or two to get trained, because this is the sort of our flow chart for our housing crisis response system, including many of the same projects I just mentioned, but in far more detail. And so we divide the county up into different regions. We have different providers, different nonprofits, and different government agencies. And you can see how complex it really is. But at the same time, how really abundant many of the resources are, especially compared to some communities. But the challenge is keeping it all coordinated and working together. And that's really where our office comes into play. We're trying to make sure that we're all working towards the same goals. We're able to attract more federal and state resources for homelessness solutions, that we're working together for the improvement of people's lives. Next slide. Now, one of the things that the county has done to help address homelessness, but also people who are panhandling and make sure they know where to go for help, is this flyer. It's a 2-page or 1-page front and back flyer. We have this in, I think, 6 different languages. If you Google Fairfax County panhandling, I think you'll find the webpage with this flyer, and it includes information primarily for single adults. If you are ever in need of services, or you know someone who's in need of services, there is no better phone number you can call than that very first number at the top left, Fairfax County CSP. It's a 222 number, 703-222-0880. I've been saying this for 19 years, and I will, go to my grave remembering this number, because it is always the first number I give someone. And you can always call, even if you're encouraging someone else to call, you can call with them and help them, to be brave and to answer some questions with a specialist on the hotline. And that person can provide information about what services are available and actual referrals if there's services in nonprofits or in government that people are eligible for. There's also emergency mental health services listed here, homeless healthcare, a domestic violence hotline. There's a large number of people experiencing domestic violence. Many of those folks become homeless because of fleeing violence. It's very important that they have expert help, such as what's available through this 24-hour hotline. So I encourage you to either write that number down or download this flyer from our website. It is a life-saving resource for people who don't know what to do, but are facing violence on a daily basis. We also have our shelters for adults. We also have our drop-in centers, Lamb Center, Rest and Drop-in Center, Gartland, Consumer Wellness Center. Primarily, they're for folks who are homeless, but also really more so with mental illness. It's a safe place, often run by peers, at least the last 3 are, where anyone is welcome. So again, great list of resources. You can print these out at your home printer, and you can have them available to give to people you may see on the streets on any given day. Next slide.
Tom, there's a question in the chat. Is the CSP phone number available 24 hours, 7 days a week?
It is not. No, currently I believe it's only 8:30 to 4, but Virginia is one of the states that uses 211 as sort of information and referral services that is available 24 hours. And so if it's outside of those hours, always encourage people to call 211. They are often very knowledgeable about what local resources are. You may not be able to do all the same types of business that is available through CSP, but you'll at least find out where's the nearest shelter and how to get there. And I would say a newer number is, I believe it's 988 for mental health services, which is something fairly new that rolled out nationally, which provides a connection to like a suicide hotline or mental health listening.
Yes, it does. But you can call the 988, but the 988, they're trying to work out the kinks, because whatever area code you call from is where they're going to find you services, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. I used to work at a suicide hotline years ago, and they would roll across the country until they found someone that was actually at a phone. And I would get calls from Tennessee, and trying to help someone from Tennessee about their local resources can be really tough. And I guarantee it's a lot less than what's here. So our community partnership has a lot of work to do over this year of 2024. As I mentioned, this newly rechartered governing board is together, about to begin a community engagement process, which will involve assessing where are the unmet needs in our community, and then establishing new strategic priorities, what things are most important for us to do next, and coming back to the Board of Supervisors with a budget recommendation. And so when people ask, as many of you may be wondering, what are the ways that I can help? There's often a handful of ways that we all talk about. And the first and in many ways most valuable thing you can give is your own time. volunteering at a local nonprofit organization or at your house of worship, providing services and help for people in need is one of the great ways to get started. And you may find that once you start giving your time, you have talents that maybe only you have. I've known people that provide tax preparation for free, pro bono. I know people that have taught financial management for a household. I know people that have taught pottery and yoga, and all provided oftentimes in the shelters. And so I challenge you to think creatively. What special talents do you have? Can you give to the local nonprofit organizations that are serving people experiencing homelessness? Then, of course, there's donations. So you can give your treasure. You can give, whether it be in-kind donations or maybe just cash donations. I can tell you many nonprofits, cash is the best because it allows them flexibility to respond to what are the needs of their clients on any given day. But nothing charges up a community like an in-kind donation drive. And I've really seen large communities get engaged that way. My only caution and really request is that you make sure you talk to the specific nonprofit that you're going to give to first, because it is incredibly challenging for a nonprofit to deal with, let's say, 10,000 socks showing up at their front door unexpectedly, right? Their space is very limited. Storage is expensive. And so you want to do it in coordination, because sometimes people do a coat drive and you got 5 organizations all doing it at the same time for around Christmas. Don't forget, how to give back in June and July as well. The needs are there all year round. And then finally, lending your voice to this issue is sort of the highest and perhaps most challenging way to help out. There are many different needs in our community, and when the Board of Supervisors are considering their budget come, say, March and April, they need to hear from you about what are your priorities. And if homelessness is a priority for you, what do you think is most important way for county government to invest their dollars? So lending your voice is probably the last, but perhaps most challenging, but could be potentially most impactful way to get back. So that is the process for this next year and the ways that you can give back. I think the next slide is just my contact information. And I encourage you to please give me a call or shoot me an email if you have thoughts or questions after tonight's presentation, but I think we still have more time available to take any questions here now.
I do have a quick question. Tom, are you going to share is the PowerPoint able to be shared?
Sure, you feel free to send it out.
Okay, so I will send it out when I send out the link to the recording for anyone, and also the survey.
Got it. Sounds good.